93-year-old veteran bullied by bikers until he makes a shocking phone call. James Jim Callahan had seen it all. A decorated World War II veteran, he had served his country with honor and returned home to build a peaceful life. At 93, his body was frail, but his spirit remained unbroken. Living alone in his small house on the outskirts of town, Jim spent most of his days tending to his garden, feeding the stray cats that visited him, and reminiscing about the past. But his quiet life was suddenly turned upside down when a group of bikers moved into the abandoned house next door. At first, Jim paid them no mind. He had learned long ago not to judge people by their appearances. The men had loud motorcycles, tattoo-covered arms, and a rough demeanor, but Jim believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. However, it soon became clear that these bikers weren't friendly neighbors. Trouble begins every evening. They roared down the street, their engines echoing like thunder. They threw beer bottles in Jim's yard, blasted loud music until the early morning, and laughed whenever he politely asked them to keep it down. It was a nightmare. One night, Jim found his mailbox smashed. Another morning, his American flag had been ripped from its pole and thrown into the dirt. The final straw came when he stepped outside to find crude graffiti sprayed across his fence, mocking his age and service. Jim clenched his fists. He wasn't a man to be bullied. He had fought against tyranny before. This was nothing compared to the battlefields of Europe. But he also knew he couldn't take on a gang of bikers alone. That's when he made the call. The shocking call. Jim's hands were steady as he dialed a number he hadn't used in decades. He took a deep breath as a deep, commanding voice answered. "Callahan," Jim said. "I need a favor." There was silence for a moment, then a chuckle. Well, I thought you were done with favors, old man." Jim smirked. "So did I. But I've got a little problem." The voice on the other end became serious. "Tell me what you need." Jim explained the situation, and when he was finished, the man simply said, "Give me an hour." An unforgettable night. The bikers were celebrating in their front yard that evening, drinking and laughing. They had no idea what was coming. An hour later, the deep rumble of engines filled the night, not from the bikers' motorcycles, but from a convoy of military-grade Harley-Davidsons. One by one, veterans rolled in, their jackets displaying patches from different branches of the military. These weren't just any veterans. These were the Iron Brotherhood, a nationwide motorcycle club made up of former Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Special Forces operatives. The lead rider, a massive man with a thick beard, stopped directly in front of the bikers. He removed his helmet and locked eyes with the leader of the gang. "You got a problem with Callahan?" the veteran growled. The bikers looked at each other, suddenly very aware of how outnumbered they were. "It was just a joke, man," one of them stammered. "No harm meant." The bearded man stepped closer. "Then you're going to clean his fence, fix his mailbox, and show some respect. Understand?" The bikers swallowed hard and nodded. Respect earned by the next morning, Jim's property was spotless. The graffiti was gone, his mailbox was standing tall, and a brand-new American flag waved proudly in the wind. The bikers? They kept their distance from Jim after that. And as for Jim, he sat on his porch, a small smile on his lips, knowing that even at 93, he still had a few good tricks up his sleeve. The lesson: never underestimate an old soldier, because somewhere, deep in his past, he still has an army. The aftermath: a veteran's legacy lives on. With the trouble resolved, Jim enjoyed a newfound sense of peace in his neighborhood. The bikers had learned their lesson, and for the most part, they stayed out of his way. Some of them even started nodding respectfully when they passed by his house. But the story wasn't over yet. A few days after the confrontation, a young man named Kyle, one of the newer members of the biker gang, hesitantly walked up Jim's porch steps. Jim, sitting in his old rocking chair, watched him carefully. "Sir," Kyle said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. I just wanted to apologize. I didn't know you were a veteran. If I did, I wouldn't have." Jim raised a hand, cutting him off. "Son, respect isn't just for veterans. It's for everyone. The old lady at the grocery store, the kid on the school bus, the guy pumping gas next to you. Respect isn't earned through war. It's earned through the way you treat people. You get what you give." Kyle swallowed hard. "Yeah, I get that now." He hesitated, then added, "You were in World War II, right?" Jim nodded. "I was in the 101st Airborne. Parachuted into Normandy on D-Day." Kyle's eyes widened. "Whoa, that's crazy. I don't know much about that stuff, but I'd love to hear about it, if you don't mind." Jim studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Pull up a chair, kid." A new friendship over the next few weeks, Kyle became a regular visitor. He asked endless questions about Jim's time in the war, and Jim, who rarely spoke about his experiences, found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years. Kyle learned about the horrors of battle, the friendships Jim had forged, and the sacrifices that had been made. He listened to stories about Jim's old squad, the freezing winter at Bastogne, and the pride he felt when the war finally ended. One evening, Kyle arrived with something unexpected, an old, restored Harley-Davidson WLA motorcycle, the same kind used by soldiers during World War II. "I found it at a junkyard," Kyle explained. "Fixed it up myself. Thought you might want to take it for a spin." Jim ran a wrinkled hand over the polished metal, his eyes misting over. "Haven't ridden one of these in 70 years, he murmured. Kyle grinned. "Well, there's a first time for everything." With a little help, Jim climbed onto the bike, gripped the handlebars, and started the engine. The powerful roar sent a thrill through his old bones, and for a moment, he felt like a young soldier again. As he rode down the quiet street, neighbors stepped outside to watch, clapping and cheering. The biker gang, now standing at a respectful distance, nodded in admiration. Jim Callahan, the 93-year-old veteran, wasn't just a relic of the past. He was a living legend. The legacy lives on Kyle soon made a big decision. He left the biker gang and joined a local veterans outreach program, inspired by Jim's stories. He started helping other struggling veterans, raising funds for homeless soldiers, and even convinced some of his old biker friends to join him. As for Jim, he spent the rest of his days knowing that his service hadn't ended on the battlefield. He had fought a different kind of war, one of respect, wisdom, and second chances. And he had won. Sometimes, the strongest battles aren't fought with fists or weapons. They're fought with wisdom, kindness, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The final ride years passed, and Jim Callahan's legend only grew. His bond with Kyle deepened, and he became something of a mentor to the younger man. Kyle, in turn, ensured that Jim was never alone, especially as age took more of a toll on him. One crisp autumn morning, Jim woke up feeling different. He could sense it deep in his bones. His time was near. But he wasn't afraid. He had lived a life worth living, fought battles worth fighting, and made peace with his past. Instead of calling an ambulance or waiting for the inevitable, Jim had one last request. He called Kyle. "Meet me out front, kid," he said, his voice steady despite his frailty. "I want one last ride." Kyle, now in his late 30s and an established advocate for veterans, rushed over with the old military Harley he had restored for Jim years ago. He found the old man dressed in his finest, the jacket he wore when he came home from the war, his medals pinned proudly to his chest. With careful hands, Kyle helped Jim onto the back of the bike. "You sure about this, old man?" Kyle asked, his voice thick with emotion. Jim grinned. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Riding into the sunset with the roar of the engine, they took off down the open road. The wind whipped against Jim's face, carrying with it the ghosts of his past, the laughter of his old squad, the echoes of battles fought, and the sweet memories of the life he had built. Neighbors stepped outside to watch. Veterans from the Iron Brotherhood stood at attention as Jim passed, saluting the man who had taught them the true meaning of courage and respect. Jim closed his eyes, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling the thrill of the ride one last time. And somewhere along that road, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Jim Callahan took his final breath. He left this world the way he had lived, free, fearless, and on his own terms. The legacy lives on Kyle slowed the bike and came to a gentle stop. He turned, but Jim was gone. A peaceful expression rested on his weathered face, as if he had simply fallen asleep. Tears filled Kyle's eyes, but he smiled. Jim had earned his rest. The town came together for his funeral, a grand ceremony with military honors. The Iron Brotherhood led a motorcycle procession, engines rumbling in tribute. Veterans saluted. Young men and women, inspired by his story, stood in quiet admiration. And at the very front of the gathering, Kyle stood tall, wearing Jim's old airborne pin on his jacket. He had lost a mentor, but he had gained a mission to carry on Jim's legacy, to fight for respect, and to ensure that no veteran was ever forgotten. Because some heroes never truly die. They live on in the stories they leave behind. Rest in peace, Jim Callahan. You'll never be forgotten.